midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I'm the Partnerships and Community Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I'm very excited to welcome our next guest onto the show, Constance Wilson. She is the Director of Belonging, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at Udemy. Constance, thank you so much for being here. If you want to share a little bit about yourself, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, do you remember how you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
I absolutely will. So hello. My name is Constance Wilson. As Christina said, thank you for that warm introduction. My pronouns are she, her. And I have been at Udemy now since March of this year, right? Joined during the pandemic, as many others did with their companies. And it's been great. And so we will dig into all things Udemy in a minute, but what I wanted to be when I grew up, I absolutely remember that question. And I wanted to be a lawyer growing up. And I wanted to be a lawyer. It stems from watching The Cosby Show and Claire Huxtable, because she was an absolute force. And she reminds me a lot of my mother, but she was just a force. She was intelligent. She was bilingual. She was a successful Black mother raising 5 kids in a brownstone in New York. And I was like, yep, sign me up. That's what I want to do. So for me, her character really embodied like the dream, right? When you think about success, and of course, success has many different definitions. When I was younger, it was that, right? And so it embodied what success could look like. And I wanted that for myself. And of course, you know, the Cosby Show now has a lot of things going on with it, right? So shout out to the women. My heart is with them who endured unimaginable trauma with the main character of the show. And that is all I'm going to say about that. But yes, I wanted to be a lawyer.
Yes. I mean, I think that's really interesting in terms of the character and what she represents. And as a
Right.
former mock trial kid as well, I was also on the lawyer train for a little bit as well. It's just like, this is what I want to be.
Right.
Get into kind of some of your day-to-day at Udemy, but I like to ask people as well, and this is kind of vague on purpose, but what defines you, Constance?
What defines me? That is an excellent question. My actions. My actions define me. I've always been told, right? Cliche, of course, but actions speak louder than words,
Mhm.
right? And so the things that you do, and sometimes the things that you don't do, right, can really have an impact on people. So yes, cliche, I get it, but my word is truly my bond in that regard. Also, what defines me, I have the boil the ocean type of mentality. It gets me into trouble sometimes because it's not realistic and it's slightly toxic, but here's why, right? I just have this approach. My mother raised me to be very, very independent, right? Like you can do anything you want to do and you can do it by yourself. You don't need help. And I'm like, cool, I got it. So whatever it was, I took that approach. And as I got older and realized that boiling the ocean is actually not realistic and probably not something I can do on my own. A very wise person, hey Jamie, told me that to start with the teacup instead. So
Okay.
boiling the ocean will seem a lot less daunting if you start with the teacup. That's manageable, right? Little teacup, you boil it, you get it done, you throw it over your shoulder, and you go back to the ocean for another cup, right? And so, especially within this work, within the DE&I space, Betty here at Udemy, Belonging, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, being in this space, it's certainly a marathon, right? It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. We didn't get to where we are overnight. So we're not going to fix where we are overnight, right? It takes some time. And so those are the things that define me.
I love it. I think that's a great answer. And I think in terms of what you talked about, like a marathon mentality, sustainable change, workplace transformation, these are things that do not happen overnight, but there are actions that you can take tomorrow, no matter where you sit in the organization, that really make an impact and eventually boil the ocean as well. One of the things that we talked about too, in terms of kind of the work that you do, a lot of folks are talking about starting with opening up their pipeline for underrepresented talent and recruiting. What does it really look like to be intentional in recruiting historically underrepresented talent in practice? If you could provide like a couple examples of how you do that at Udemy.
Absolutely. I think one of the first things is understanding your starting point, where are you? So before you can go and like set strategic goals about where you want to be, and this is what we want to look like in 2025, you need to understand where you are present day to be able to have a baseline to be able to make those goals from. So understanding your current demographic composition of your workforce are something as simple as identifying first. Well, I'm hoping that everyone understands the different dimensions of diversity. So understanding that, and then taking account to see whether or not all the dimensions of diversity are actually present, right? So socioeconomic status, education, generational, right? Geographic location, language. There's of course the topical things, so like gender and race and things like that. But so it's important to understand those things so that you can again project out and kind of set goals for where you would like to be in the future. Another thing that we're working on right now, actually at Udemy, is our self-identification initiative. And this will really help inform understanding where you are in terms of demographic representation. And so our initiative is called Be Represented. And Be Represented is really, it's a way for all of our employees to go through and volunteer their information for their demographic information. Right. And so before you can do that, you need to make sure that you have a couple of things in place, because people are going to be like, why do you want my information? Absolutely not. I'm not sharing. Right. So you have to have things like psychological safety. Right. You need to make sure that you have an understanding with your employees for how their information is going to be used, what you're going to do with it, who has access to it. Right. So those are a couple of the core things that should really be ironed out and fully understood by all parties involved before taking on an initiative like this. But it's a way to get to know your people. And another thing that we did at Udemy was to really move beyond the EOO, equal employment opportunity categories within Udemy, was to get deeper. We want to know who you are. We don't want to just, submit your data to the feds because that's what we need to do as a federal contractor, right? Like we really want to know who you are. So we're asking questions around like first generation status, right? Education status. Are you a caretaker? What languages do you speak at home, right? So this is the way that you actually get to know your people, a level down, if you will, or step down from EOO categories. And we are also working to get this done on a global scale. Now, with things like global data protection rights, makes it a little bit more difficult to do outside of the States. So we are working with our legal team to see there's a way to do it, right? So we're working with our legal team to see what questions we can ask and where, to make sure that our demographic data isn't just focused on the States, but is really a global international landscape, so we can understand everyone that's here and not just the folks in the States, right? Another thing with this is that understanding underrepresented groups, where they are and what does that mean to them, right? So in the US, we have a focus on like race and ethnicity, people with disabilities, gender, LGBTQIA+. In China and India, that looks different. In Turkey, that looks different, right? So really understanding what those underrepresented groups are for the different regions that you're serving in. And another initiative that we're doing at Udemy right now is really expanding our talent pool. So where are we looking? Mm-hmm. Right? Where are we looking for these underrepresented communities? So for example, there are historically Black colleges and universities. There's about 107 of them, I believe, in the States, right? And then we have Hispanic serving institutions. We have tribal colleges and universities, which focus on the indigenous population, right? You can look at professional organizations. So like Society for Women in Engineering. There's organizations like Out in Tech and American Indian Business Leaders that you can look to as a way to just really targeting, right, the underrepresented groups and understanding what their needs are, and then being able to pull them into your organization. And another thing I think that can be done is really rethinking the referral programs.
Yes.
Okay. Disclaimer: referral programs can be great. What they have turned out to be and what they have resulted in traditionally, from my experience, is that we have people bringing in their friends or bringing in their family, and right. And so you have groups of people that are bringing in groups of people that look like them. And if you don't have people from systemically marginalized or from historically excluded communities, then your population starts to look really homogenous, right? Mm-hmm. Which is not the goal that we're looking to do. We're looking for things to be more diverse. And so those are some of the things that those are some of the initiatives that we're running at Udemy. And one more important thing is really key is being intentional with your language, with the language that you're using, right? And so we've been saying underrepresented groups and things like that. What happens is though, is that terminology actually glosses over the systems that are in place and that were designed to keep these groups from being underrepresented. So I don't think there's really lack of representation so much as there are an underserved population, right? Or a systemically or historically excluded population. So I think using language that better identifies how we got to where we are would be more helpful to those groups, because for the groups out there that are being right called or deemed underrepresented, it's like, but I'm not, I'm right here, right? It's just about where you're going to look for me, right? And so those are some of the initiatives that we're doing at Udemy and some of the ways that we're really being intentional with our recruiting efforts.
I love it. It sounds like a really intentional and sustainable strategy. And I appreciate that global aspect as well. It definitely comes down to common language in terms of what do you mean by diversity, equity, and inclusion? Yes. What are your goals? Understanding where you are, because, you know, you as an organization are in a different place than others, and just That's understanding right. that, asking folks as well. The language you use is really important as well. And I want to ask too, in terms of the role that leaders have in really removing systemic barriers for talent. How can like folks really remove them in terms of, I know we talked a little bit about kind of tangible ways, but I appreciate that you brought up the referral program, like job descriptions, required experience. What are your thoughts on that?
Job descriptions are huge. So right now, job seekers spend about the last article I read said 49.7 seconds reading a job description before they say, I'm not a fit, right? I'm not a fit. I don't meet all these qualifications. So you really have to make those seconds count with inclusion, especially within job descriptions. So for example, gender identity, we spoke about that a little bit. So some job descriptions focus on binary, right? Male and female, but that's exclusionary to so many other genders that are now present in our society, right? And so being specific and using things like gender decoding tools to use things that are more neutral in language would really help. Also to think about within job descriptions, cognitive processing, right? So 10% of the people within the US have dyslexia or are people with dyslexia, right? So using fonts that are more inclusive, such as like Arial or Comic Sans or Verdana would definitely help. And then also avoiding acronyms, don't use an acronym, right? When you're using acronyms in job descriptions, you're assuming that everyone is familiar with the language and the acronym that you're using, and it's just not true. So KPIs, key performance indicators, or P&Ls, which is profit and loss statements. So that's in business. If you have been in business, you get that. You pick it up, you click it, you're good to go. But if you've never been in business, that likely may not make sense to you, right? So instead of using those acronyms, spell them out. Another initiative or thing that we're doing at Uni right now is to really, really reevaluate and consider years of experience and education. Professor Van Eideking from Florida State University did a study with 81, there was about 81 studies that he did, and they basically concluded that there is no correlation between an employee's prior work experience and their performance in a new job. Right. So what that says to me is if you have 20 years of experience, that doesn't guarantee you're going to be successful in your new role. So now there's a caveat, right? If I'm on a plane, I would likely want my pilot to have 20 years of experience. Sure, yeah. Right. Or if I have a doctor that's doing surgery, I would likely want someone that has more experience in that way. So absolutely. But, you know, just rethinking that, how many years of experience does someone actually need? Are there on the job things that they can learn, right? Are there things that they can do? And I understand, again, you have to have a certain standard because you don't want, you do want the whole world applying for your jobs, but that's likely a lot for your recruiting team. So just kind of considering those things. And another one is around education. Right. And so Professor Van Eideking spoke about doing things like behavioral assessments and structured interviews, right, to really help out predicting job performance in a new job. And when you do that versus experience, it jumps to about 58% in terms of the person actually being able to perform well in their job, right? So there are definitely things that corporations can do to kind of remove those systemic barriers, and also making sure that you're actually opening the door to more people, right? Not being so exclusionary.
Absolutely. I think those are really good, tangible ways that you can look at job descriptions. You can look at experience. And I know there are a ton of studies that are based on gender, that are based on race, that say, people who acknowledge their bias of hiring for potential versus hiring for
That's right.
past experience as well. And it's really
Mhm.
important to understand that too. And again, remove those barriers to make sure that you're opening up the talent pool as well. You're working with organizations, such as you mentioned too, to make sure you have folks who are in that pipeline.
Yes.
I think it's great that organizations like Udemy and others are thinking about, hiring really great talent. The other side of the conversation too is about retention and internal
Mm.
mobility. It's not enough just to recruit like junior
Mm-mm.
or even executives as well, but retain and promote underserved talent too. What pathways are available for internal mobility at Udemy?
Well, we have a couple of them. And Christina, you couldn't be more right, right? So representation is great, right? That's a thing. We want
Yeah,
representation. We
we do.
want people to feel like, right, what you see is you can't be what you can't see, right? So we definitely want that representation. But if you're focused so much on representation and you're not focused on keeping
Yeah.
keeping the people that you're bringing in, you're going to have a problem, right? You're still going to have you're going to have to fix one problem, then you have another problem on this hand, right? So being able to retain employees and making sure that they feel seen, they feel included, they feel like they belong is of great importance. And that's what we're focusing on at Udemy. So we have a couple of initiatives. The first one is our career navigator, right? So with the career navigator, we're actually putting employees behind the driver's seats for their career, really leaving it up to them. So these career navigators are conversations that happen twice a year between employees and managers, and they're based on the GROW coaching model. And I'm going to go through that. So it's an acronym, GROW. So we have G, which is your goals for your careers, right? What are you setting out to do? What is it that you think you want to do? The R, which is the current reality in relation to those goals. So is it realistic that I'm going to jump right now from where I sit in the organization to the CEO within the next couple of months? Likely not, but right, making sure that they are that they're realistic. Those goals is definitely important. And another one, the last, almost second to last letter, is the O, which stands for options. The options based on the goals and realities that you're trying to have set forth in your career. And then the last one is will. What is your will? And that speaks to the specific actions that employees can commit to move forward. And so again, these conversations happen twice a year between employees and managers. And we also encourage employees all the time to continuously have these conversations, right? So in your one-to-one meetings with your managers, just making sure it's always top of mind and present. So when you have things like performance reviews, you're kind of set and you kind of know where you're standing, right? So you can continue to have those conversations. So in addition to the GROW coaching model, we also have our Mentor You program, which is a mentorship program. And it's a two-way relationship where individuals are learning and growing from each other's experience. And it's really targeted towards our more junior individuals to make sure that they're able to better understand and better navigate rather their professional pursuits, right? And so it's helping all participants within the program to really learn and grow in their career and expand our networks. And of course, the last thing, Udemy is a learning platform. So we have about 183,000 courses that our employees can go and take to really leverage and make the best decisions in their careers in terms of whatever they'd like to do, right? If they're upskilling, if they're reskilling, looking at, really just, again, putting the employees back behind the driver's seat and allowing them to take their career navigations into their own hands.
I love it. It sounds like there are a lot of kind of formal resources available for kind of the grow and mentorship. And
Yes.
it's really important to understand like what options are out there as well in
Yes.
terms of retention. And I think over the past 2 years, a lot of folks have been thinking about how to be, that employer of choice, especially with all the conversations around the great resignation, people working from home, thinking about what
Mhm.
they're really working on for 40 plus hours a week. Have you kind of thought about changing the retention strategy over the past 2 years as well, due to kind of all of the kind of changes we're seeing and challenges?
There are so many changes that are happening. So again, I've been here at Udemy since March of this year, and
Yeah.
there's been a ton of change since that time. I think when I started, we were probably around in the hundreds in terms of the numbers of employees that we have. And now we're at like over 1,200 or close to, right? So it's been a lot, and we've grown that number since the pandemic, which is just wild.
Yeah.
But to your point, there have been a couple of initiatives and strategies that we're doing, which is a couple of things, starting with doubling down really on our onboarding efforts to ensure that folks feel valued and supported on their day one. Onboarding and the day one experience for all employees is crucial, right? Like that's when you've sold them on the company, they've signed the offer letter, and day one is really that second to first impression that you're doing, right? To say, you belong here. Thank you for joining us, and having the employees feel like that. That's what it is, right? They're a value add. They're not a culture fit. Don't say that. Culture fit is not a good thing, right? We're looking for value add. And so we have our day one at Udemy includes our new at you session. And essentially we have onboarding cohorts that learn about the company, the culture, our values, right? They get help from our RT team. They meet with their onboarding buddies. They meet with members of their respective team. And a really cool part of that is that they also meet with our CEO on day one, right? Every cohort that we have coming in through Udemy meets with our CEO, and they get to have like a round robin session. And essentially what that means is they can sit with him, they can ask questions of our CEO, Greg Kokari, they can ask him questions, he can ask them questions. It's really a two-way experience just for the employees that are coming on to know that they are important, right? And they can feel seen and heard, and that they do belong here. But it's our way of establishing that right up front. Right. So that's one of the initiatives that we have. Another one is we want to keep hearing from our employees, right? After that day one experience, we still want to hear from them. We want to know what they're thinking. We want to know what's going on. And so we have feedback is fuel. It's one of our mantras at Udemy, right? And feedback is fuel. And what that does is it really encourages all of our employees to be able to provide feedback, real time, one-on-one. This is what I'm thinking, to their managers, or during the things that they may have seen during our onboarding process. So for example, another one of the initiatives is fresh eyes. Right. And so with fresh eyes, we ask our employees that are going through, if you see something, say something. If you're going through, an onboarding course or through a training course and a link is broken, please tell us so that we can fix it. Yeah. Right. And so it's simple, right? But I mean, I've been here since March, and my eyes gloss over when I see all the things that our onboarding cohorts have to go through in terms of that there's just so much information that they're taking in. And so giving them the ability to just, hey, it's okay. If you see something, just let us know so we can go back and fix it. Or if you see something interesting, or if you have another perspective on something that you've seen or that you've read, please let us know, because your perspectives are valued, right? And we want to hear about that so we can continuously be improving whatever it is that we have. And outside of that, we also established, in terms of being able to hear from employees and making sure that they feel valued and that they feel heard, we also have a global Betty Council, which we've established. And the council, what that does is it consists of representatives from across the globe, from across business units and across organizational levels. So we have people that have just started here in entry level roles, and there's also people all the way up to our senior leadership team that are on the council, right? Really helping us to understand from a Betty perspective, what we're doing great, right? The things that are going well, how to double down on those efforts. And then the flip side of that, things that we can maybe use improvements on, right? So what are you saying that's not working? What are you saying that could use improvements upon? Let us know that. As a council, we get together, we discuss those things. And then we're essentially also serving as an advisory board to our executive staff. Right. So we take what we hear on the council and we roll it up to our executive staff and saying, this is what we're hearing. What can we do to fix it? Right. And then not only what can we do to fix it, but these are our proposed solutions to the things that we're hearing, and what can we do to implement these things, right, that we're discussing. Another strategy in terms of retention, is really being more intentional with our data and understanding the intersectionality of it. Right. So as we're going through things like pay equity and promotions and recruitment and retention and attrition, being able to understand the root causes of those things so that we can actually apply systemic solutions as opposed to a Band-Aid solution that just fixes this little thing right here for right now, right? We want to make sure that any root cause issues are actually being solved at the root so that they don't come back, right? And if they do come back, we have a faster way to mitigate them. And then the last initiative that I'll discuss with you, Christina, is as the world is slowly opening up, right? And COVID is COVID is still having its way with us,
Yeah.
right? Like, let's be clear about that, right? There are still many obstacles and things that we need to consider in terms of how to safely return to the office for those that would like to, and what that looks like, a hybrid workforce, a remote first workforce, right? There are so many things that are going on. So what we did at Udemy was to establish a return to office task force to really help us to have a group of people that are solely focused on helping us figure out what this looks like and navigate returning to the office, what that means for each of our regions, how to do so safely. Because of course, all of our regions are at different stages too with COVID, right? There's like one day you think that everything is great and we can open up, and then the next day, boom, there's a variant, Delta variant or whatever that is. And now we have to, rethink our strategy. So having someone, a team of people really dedicated to that has been most helpful, with the objective of just ensuring, bottom line, that all of our employees are safe. That's the goal, right? To make sure that our employees are safe and they can work safely without having to worry about and navigate COVID. And oh my goodness, what if I go back in? What does that look like? And what do I do if someone gets sick, right? So we have strategies in place to kind of not combat, but mitigate it as much as we can.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it sounds like you are really laying the foundation to listen to the voices of employees from day one, from onboarding, really have that visibility with executives, which is something that people have kind of asked for over time as well, expecting more from their leaders. And one of the things you mentioned too, because of the nature of Udemy's mission and kind of the products and services offered to as a learning platform, is people really want to develop in their career. They're looking for professional development and continuous learning opportunities. Can you share kind of a little bit more about the options available at Udemy there?
Of course, as you said, we are continuously learning as a learning platform, right? And I will say, among the many advantages that the employees have, that employees are offered at Udemy, that's one of them, right? Being able to take advantage of the 183,000 courses that we have on the platform is huge for really being able to drive your career and drive what you want to do, to be able to learn those skills that you would otherwise have to find another recourse to get to them, right? But we have the recourse. We have the recourse that people want, and we're able to take advantage of and leverage that. We take learning very seriously, right? It's at the core of what we do. So we have the platform. In addition to that, we have Deal. And Deal, Christina, is drop everything and learn. It happens every third Wednesday of the month, and folks spend an hour out of their day learning, right? Learning on the platform. And so they can choose their own adventure. I've taken courses on Mandarin. I've taken courses, about investing and finances. They can, kind of peruse the platform and see what's interesting to them. They can also choose to join a group of colleagues, right? And kind of learn as a team for some cohort-based learning and see, what's out there, discuss actionable items from the course and how they can implement that in their day-to-day. And so there's a blocked schedule actually on our calendars, and the expectation is that meetings are not to be booked during that time, because again, we take learning seriously and we want our employees to be able to really deal, right? Drop everything and learn and just focus on, bettering themselves.
I love that. I also love the acronym. I never thought of that before. But I think that's important too, to really block off time on your calendar and really take the investment for yourself to learn, really use the platform as well. And I think there's a lot to say about cohort-based learning and really learning with your teammates and peers as well. Part of the other conversation too is around like reskilling or upskilling too. Does Udemy have any formal or informal kind of programs or pathways to do that?
Of course we do. And I don't think we would be Udemy if we didn't. So we spoke about Deal, right? So in addition to that, we have our learning fair, and then we also have our skills chat. So the global learning fair is exactly what it sounds like. It's a fair where you're kind of going through and learning. And we just set one up. We had our last one in October, where it was a full 24-hour day of around the clock learning, so that no matter where employees were in the world, they can participate. And as I said, it took place in October, but there were topics such as meditation, self-defense. We had video games and learning science and their intersectionality, the healthy world of herbs and CBD, right? And so the best part about the learning fair is that these courses are actually taught live by our Udemy employees and instructors, right? So it's like, that's my colleague. Let me go to their course and see, right? And see what they're teaching about. And they get to share their expertise with the internal community. And so it helps with that. And then it really just helps to get to know people, right? On a deeper level. So we have these silos, right? This is not just the Udemy thing, but in corporate America, there's these silos where it's like, the business team or the marketing team, right? And everyone kind of just functions within their own silos. But
Yep.
the learning platform allows you to kind of go outside of your, your structured team and kind of get to know other people and what they're doing and what they're saying. And then from there, you're more inclined to get to know about them in relation to the business, right? So what is your role and what do you do here and how does that work? And you kind of get to get that that inclusion feeling, but in addition to that, it's like a deeper level of understanding the person behind the job as opposed to just a task, right? Like your job is insert here, whatever that looks like, but now you can really get to know that person. And then the last initiative that we have is it's fairly similar to like the deal program that we discussed, and this is called the skills chat. So the skills chat kicked off earlier this year, and it's social learning in 10 minutes, right? And so our learning and development team goes and they provide employees with tools to foster these 10-minute conversations with guiding questions around topics such as collaboration, emotional intelligence, psychological safety, and storytelling, right? But it's just, again, a way to infuse that learning culture within the company and have it be a fun way of doing so.
I love that, the skills chat. I think that's great.
That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Learning from your colleagues as well and instructors too is, and also a really great way to kind of promote understanding as well for kind of someone outside of their day-to-day role as well. And kind of things like the skills chat and like really redesigning systems and to make them more inclusive. And a lot of folks have been talking about, because of COVID, of course, there is a huge challenge, but also a huge opportunity to really not do things business as usual, to really innovate. And you've shared a lot of really great examples already, but really want to ask if there's anything else that you kind of want to share in terms of innovation and redesigning systems to be more equitable over the past 2 years.
Absolutely. And like I said, I mean, Udemy is really taking a holistic approach to embedding our iteration of DEI, which again, of course, Betty, for a recap, that's belonging, equity, diversity, and inclusion, right? By really analyzing our systems to understand any potential inequities, right? So we talked a little bit about earlier about like benchmarking and what that looks like. And it's really right, the results that we're trying to get at from the analysis that we're doing is to inform the Betty strategy that we have coming together and help us to create a roadmap for what we want to accomplish in the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road, right? And so with our benchmark set, we'll continually monitor that progress and recalibrate our strategy as needed until we achieve our objectives. And that starts from the very first thing that we discussed, right? Around understanding what the demographic data is. There is no way that we can set, goals and objectives, if you will, without understanding where we currently are, right? Anything else without that understanding is like throwing things at the wall to see what's going to stick. That's not a good strategy, right? Your strategy should be and has to be based in data in order to make them, in order to make the changes happen that we need to see.
Absolutely. Data-driven decisions, insight-driven is really important. And that goes back to your earlier point as well in terms of kind of, fueled by feedback and really kind of asking folks, like how they're thinking. And you want to hear the positive, negatives, anything in between, because if you're not hearing it, it is happening, between teams, offline or anything like that. So I also wanted to ask you as well, how do you see really something that we believe in too at AllVoices around employee feedback management, but really a tool to build a culture of listening and trust, and how you see this culture manifesting at Udemy?
It's vital. Employee feedback is absolutely vital to fostering a culture of trust and psychological safety. There's nothing that will silence employees more quickly than asking for their feedback and doing nothing with it. Right. So if you have these engagement surveys, and you have pulse surveys and you have all these things coming out and employees are taking their time, right, out of their day to go through and give you this feedback and tell you what they're thinking, and you do nothing with it, I can almost guarantee those engagement scores they're going to continuously decline, right? Because employees are feeling like you're asking me for my opinion and I'm giving you liquid gold, right? By giving it to you and you're doing nothing with it. And by nothing, I mean either, not listening to the feedback, not creating actionable strategies and programs to be able to ensure that the feedback is actually incorporated, right? So literally just maybe sitting on it and doing nothing with it. It's not a good thing to do at all. And it won't help gain that and establish and really foster that psychological safety and trust that we're talking about. And as we know, especially people that are from systemically marginalized communities are often most likely to not participate in those engagement surveys, right? Because the trust is there. So if I, Constance, put my name on something around the question of, do you feel like your manager establishes Betty or, fosters an environment for Betty at the company, and I say no, my name is associated with that right now, right? And so that may lead to, and this of course is a hypothetical situation, but that may lead to like retaliation and things like that, right? And so that's a real fear for me. So maybe I don't want to share in the engagement survey. Maybe I don't feel like there's enough trust that has been established here, or maybe I'm a new employee and I just don't feel like, I don't feel comfortable yet, asking questions. And maybe, if I do, it'll seem like a silly question or a dumb question. Of course, there are no dumb questions, but right, as a new employee, I may feel that way. And so just making sure that the feedback is actually incorporated, again, is absolutely vital at Udemy. And we definitely spoke about, right, feedback being fuel. We actually have a course on the platform. Feedback is fuel. And it really helps employees to understand, kind of provides employees with the tools that they can use to be able to provide that feedback, right? So for example, we use the model, the SBI model, which stands for situation, behavior, and impact. So say, for example, Christina, you and I were in a meeting and I noticed as Jane Smith was speaking, you cut Jane off, right? So I come to you in a one-on-one and I say, Christina, during that last meeting, when we were talking, Jane had made a comment about fixing our marketing initiatives. And I noticed that, you cut her off. When you cut her off, what likely happened, Jane might not want to, or she might not feel comfortable speaking up next time because she was cut off, and she might feel like her opinion isn't valued, right? And that's not the type of environment that we're trying to foster. And I'm sure that's not what you meant, but I wanted to bring it to your attention. Right. And so while that is easier said than done, right. And we still need to consider things like, psychological safety and trust and the power dynamics, right, that might exist within all of these things. And then there's also a level of privilege. We've discussed that, right? There's a level of privilege that comes with being able to provide feedback, especially again, when the power dynamics are involved. So providing this feedback as fuel course to our employees is going to help mitigate that and help break that down so that employees, again, are given the tools that they need to be able to have these types of conversations, and let them know that, yes, feedback is fuel. We are encouraging everyone to be able to speak up and be their earnestly authentic self. That's one of our values, right? But again, we understand that it takes some time to do that. So just providing employees with a way to be able to do that, right? And do so in a setting where they should both feel, where the person that's giving the feedback and the person that's receiving the feedback both feel like they can kind of learn and grow from it, and having them be able to flex their muscle a little bit is important. So that's why we're constantly making sure that we not only take the feedback and listen to it, but we're also giving recourses for people to be able to give that feedback.
Absolutely. And it takes time to establish trust with the employees as well, but it is really easy to really break that as well, in terms of not responding to feedback, not sharing, even if you can't take an action tomorrow, just sharing that we heard this is what we're doing right now, and just the context behind it too. And I think really thinking about when you're giving kind of peer-to-peer or manager to individual feedback, what the intention is, really being, thoughtful in your communication as well, in the way that you give it, because everybody likes to receive and give feedback in different ways, is also important in terms of psychological safety, understanding the power dynamics as well, as you were talking about. Constance, I know I asked you just like very specific questions around Udemy's strategy, kind of your path to organization as well, but I always think it's interesting to ask kind of the open-ended question of what is taking up the most brain space in your mind right now?
The most brain, the real estate right now in my brain is what's taking up the most brain space. Where we are right now, especially given where we are in our society, the things that are happening, the trials that are taking place, it's just, there's a lot of things taking up my real estate, and my brain real estate, and it's all coming back to what we discussed earlier, coming to terms with the fact that the changes that need to be made in our society likely will not happen in my lifetime, which makes me fight that much harder, right? It makes me fight that much harder to ensure that the work is one step closer to completion for the next generation of system dismantlers, I will call them, that are coming in, right? And it's just being being okay with that. We talked about my boil the ocean mentality, right? And just really
Yeah.
just wanting to do it all because I said I can do it all, right? But it's just not going to happen overnight. Right. And so we need all the help that we can get. There needs to be all hands on deck to continue to dismantle the systems that are in place to making sure that everyone can live with humanity. My goodness. I don't think that's a big ask, right?
I don't think that's a big ask either.
But that's what's taking up my brain space these days.
I think that is a lot to take up in your brain space. And also, everyone should be called to be a system dismantler, in my humble opinion.
That's right.
And it is not a huge ask. It is not a huge ask. I know we've been talking also around innovation and redesigning systems to be more equitable. And even with the best of intentions, the impact, right, is not always what we imagine. So, not necessarily at Udemy or any other place you've worked at ever, but what you're seeing in terms of common mistakes people are making in their own vetting strategy, whether it's in terms of attraction or retention of underserved talent. What are your thoughts there?
Three main things, Christina, come to mind. The first is marketing versus true representation. Let's start there. I love your face.
Yeah.
Let's start there. It is a huge, huge, huge mistake. If you bring people in under the guise that you are a diverse company, you're an inclusive company, right? And people should feel like they belong and that you have all this equity only for people to come into the door after you've marketed them to them, right? Because you've put, members from systemically marginalized groups or whatever that looks like on your website and they're like plastered all over the place. And then when employees actually get into the company, it's very homogenous. That will be the first way to get your employees that you've just recruited back out the door.
Yeah,
right. So that's one of my first ones, right? Having websites and career pages that are filled with dimensions of diversity, and then the workforce is homogenous. That's a mistake. Be upfront and be honest about where you are in terms of your DE&I initiatives and where you aren't. And that's okay. Being transparent and being upfront about it, most people can get behind that, as opposed to you seemingly, what's the word I want to use here? Deceiving folks, right? Into thinking that you're something that you're not. Be upfront. This is where we are. This is where we're trying to go. And that might not be okay with everyone. And that's fine too. Right. But it's about being transparent and honest. The other one is looking for what we were discussing earlier, looking for that culture fit. Looking for a culture fit versus a value add, right? Culture fit equates to, for example, I only want people that have investment portfolios. Whoop, hands down for that one. I don't have investment portfolio.
Yeah.
Right. I don't have, not yet. I will, but not yet. Right. Versus those who maybe have non-traditional experiences. And there is nothing wrong with people that have investment portfolios at all. I want to make that clear. That is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if you're looking for folks that only have that one particular criteria, as opposed to considering outside of that, right? That's what it comes down to when you're talking about culture add or culture fit versus value add, right? And so just making sure that you understand the difference between the two, culture fit and value add, and that you're also making sure that you're expanding your surroundings and expanding your talent pools, which is what we were discussing earlier.
Yes.
And the last one is westernizing DE&I strategies in a global landscape. Let's talk about that, right? So I have seen in my experience companies say, oh, well, you know what? It works in the States. We're going to go ahead and do it across the board. And it's like, nope, let's not do that. That's a terrible idea, right? And the mentality that something works in the US and, saying that it will work in a global market is a terrible assumption, but it's also assuming that whatever is working in the States is the best way to do it. Right. And whatever works in the States is going to work for everyone else. It's not true. Right. Because there are different cultures to be considered. There are differences and nuances that need to be considered. And if you try to just globalize a strategy based on what's working in the state, you're going to fail. And people are going to feel like they're not being included. They're not going to see themselves because they're not in the United States, right? They're in other regions. And so strategies need to be customized for those particular regions. And then so we'll have a region, we'll have maybe a US strategy and a strategy for Turkey. And what that comes into, I'm just naming countries when I said Turkey, right? But those are some of the regions that we have. We have offices, and right, we have offices in Australia and Turkey and India, right? And in Dublin. So we have all these offices. And so what it needs to look like instead is having strategies that are focused with these different regions in mind, and an overarching global strategy that kind of brings all of those together. Right. And so those are the top three for me, right? Marketing versus true representation, culture fit versus culture add, and then westernizing D&I strategies.
I think that is really important, especially the third around westernizing DEI strategies, because this
Yes,
is not a check the box cookie cutter situation where we say,
that's
okay,
right.
like we have one strategy here, and you never want to assume what people need and want as well, especially in terms
No.
of culturally and what diversity, equity, inclusion means in different countries as well.
Right.
I think that goes back to earlier point in acknowledging where you are too, both physically and geographically.
Mhm.
Constance, is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to share, or one to two key takeaways you hope listeners bring with them after listening to our conversation today?
A couple. I think I'm going to stick with the three trend.
Yeah, do it.
So the first one, while we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, the fact is that means different things to different people,
Mhm.
right? And to different organizations. So one of the first things would be to really come together as an organization and understand what that means to your organization, right? If I say diversity to person A, they may think gender diversity. If I say diversity to person B, they may say or think about, racial or ethnicity or ethnic diversity, as opposed to all of the dimensions of diversity, right? And understanding what those looks like. Some people are of the mindset that the E in DE&I stands for equality, when it's actually equity, right? So understanding those things, and then also understanding what inclusion actually looks like. What does it mean, right? What does it mean when we say it here in this organization, right? How does it show up? What behaviors, right, are expected from that, right? And so that's one of the first things. I'll refer to the second point that we've kind of spoke about a little bit, that it's impossible to diversify your talent pool if you're not being intentional about the manner in which you choose to fill it.
Yeah.
Right. So expand yourself, go beyond those referral programs, right? And seek out those organizations, those schools, those universities, those populations, seek out where they are and go seek them, go speak to them, get to know your community, get to know those communities, right? Don't make assumptions, go, right? Go out and see them, seek them, and be able to bring them into your talent pool. And then the last point, we talked about this transparency. Monster.com, their research says that 86% of candidates globally say that DE&I in the workplace is important to them, right? So we spoke about that transparency. So again, just be transparent with your folks, external candidates, potential candidates, internal candidates, whatever that looks like. Be transparent about where you are with your efforts, both what you've done and what you're planning to do. And again, they likely won't stay very long if you've told them, yes, it's peaches and creams and rainbows and everything is fine here, right? And people are treated equitably and we have all types of diversity. If they get there and they get inside and they don't see what you told them, there's no correlation, they're going to leave, right? So just be transparent about where you are. Even if it's not ideal, being transparent about it is the best way to go.
It is the best way to go. It is also really important to have that two-way communication, be transparent. People can tell when you're being genuine and authentic or not, whether
Yes.
potential employees or current employees as well. It all goes back to what you were talking about earlier, and you kind of mentioned when you talked about what defines you in terms of actions, and really putting actions behind words and strategies as well. Constance, I truly enjoyed our conversation here today. Thanks so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture.
Yes, thank you. It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Christina.
Of course. And as a reminder for folks who are listening at AllVoices, we really believe in that employee feedback management as a requirement for the company to succeed on a whole. Have a good rest of your afternoon, everyone.
Thanks.